So we're going to talk about whether does rock and roll belong in a museum. And I thought I'd start out by giving a little bit of background on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The idea for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame came about back in the sort of mid-'80s, around 1984, 1985. And Ahmet Ertegun, late Ahmet Ertegun, president of Atlantic Records, Jan Wenner, the editor and publisher of Rolling Stone, John Hammond, and some other folks basically got together and they felt something needed to be done to honor these legendary people who really were at the roots of rock and roll and really helped it evolve over the years and all that. So they basically came up with the concept of having a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And in 1986, they held their first induction ceremony. The original plan was to do some sort of a small museum, something like that, in New York City. And then the people of Cleveland basically heard about it, and they thought that there should be a world-class museum, and it should be in Cleveland. And Cleveland's reasoning for that was that, Cleveland is where Alan Freed started using the term rock and roll to describe this new form of music that was evolving. Cleveland was always a sort of a big rock and roll center. It was the first place in the North that Elvis Presley ever played a show. During like the 70s, there was a radio station there, WMMS, and they broke Bruce Springsteen. It was the first place Bruce Springsteen broke outside of New Jersey. David Bowie, a lot of other artists. So it always has had a strong rock and roll element to it. So the people of Cleveland thought the museum should be there.
So the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is sort of, in my opinion, the flagship institution of American popular culture musical history. And what's exciting to me is that since the founding of the Rock Hall museum side of things, more and more institutions have been rising up. There's always been a history of popular music museums actually in this country, but many of them are private museums, some of them individual museums. Go to Nashville, you can see a ton of these little museums dedicated to particular artists. There is the Country Music Hall of Fame is also a great institution that we should mention, a real model, I think, for that. But it's interesting about the Country Music Hall of Fame in comparison to both the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Experience Music Project, where I used to work, and even the Grammy Museum, which is the latest in the pop culture museums. Country music, the kind of the powers that be or were and are within Nashville really understood that preserving the music's history, honoring it institutionally, and formally stating this is an important American cultural tradition could feed. Could not only preserve things that people needed to know about, but could actually feed the industry. And country music as an industry has always been deeply linked to this idea of tradition that has been partially created by the Country Music Hall of Fame. I think we would agree. So there's not been tension within that musical world. There may be individual tension around what should be in that Hall of Fame, but the idea that you should preserve that tradition has always been accepted within country music. The idea that the tradition of what we put under the large umbrella of rock and roll should be preserved has always been fraught. And I would hope that we've hit a point in the history of rock and its children that we can just get over that argument. Because honestly, it gets us nowhere to say, rock and roll is this rebellious thing. It's iconoclastic. We can't put it in a museum. It's a ridiculous suggestion. Unless we preserve this music and the stories of the people who have made the music and the artifacts of those people, we will lose individual stories.
Partly my answer is why shouldn't rock and roll be in a museum? But if you have a museum dedicated to rock and roll, you have to have an educational mission, right? That's absolutely key to it. But for a lot of people, teaching about rock and roll is some kind of travesty, right? And that kind of comes from the right and the left. Some opponents of the idea really haul out the same anti-rock arguments today that we've been hearing since the 1950s. Rock and roll isn't art. It's filthy, and kids need to be spending their time on more important subjects. We still hear that. And at the same time, rock fans and sometimes rock critics say that by putting rock and roll in the classroom, we're killing it. We're sort of neutering its rebellious spirit. So, You know, I think that one key part of our educational mission is to constantly push back against this anti-rock argument, to say over and over again that rock and roll is a significant art form that transformed American culture. So the challenge is, how do you make that argument while staying true to the spirit of the music, right? The question, of course, is, what is the spirit of the music? There's no consensus on that either, as the kind of debates about who's in and out reveal, among other things. You know, for some people, it's a sort of boomer or punk idea of individual rebellion. For others, it's you know, rock and roll is a kind of community of people who use the music to find their place in the world. I'm not sure some of our great sort of artists that are rooted in the gospel sense of the beloved community really have a sense of kind of rebellion in the way that we sometimes might talk about.
One really amazing experience I just had was we were just in Memphis and we got to go to the Sxsw Museum, and that was, I mean, I'm thinking about it now, just the introductory video just was making me feel like crying, and it was really beautiful. And seeing them talk about the gritty sort of like underbelly and the civil rights clash and everything of Memphis in this like critical time in history, and showing it against the sort of, what to me, like Detroit's a pretty bombed out place now, but I mean, this kind of glitzy sort of urban vibe of the Motown thing, and just really seeing that difference and embracing that, which to me as an American, I love that sense of like constant turmoil and that culture clash that really creates this really special quality that just doesn't seem to exist to me in any other place, which is just my one perspective. But I really feel like I'm really grateful for that.
Well, we're all just learning, and that's really, to me, what the museum's about. In the 70s, Patty and I came on a phrase, I don't know where we got it, but it seems to be ever true. It says, the guardians of history are soon rewarded with history themselves. And I think that if you know whence you come, you know where you can take it. I'm kind of a history buff and a fan of things, and I like to research odd areas. And to me, the greatest thing that the Hall of Fame can do is provide a center for gathering artifacts and memorabilia and the scraps of history that too often get lost. I'm a big fan of the relic and the artifact. When I'm on the road, I've seen Tolstoy's typewriter. And regardless of whether Tolstoy is there to type on it for me, I get a sense of how it must have been for him to create. When I go downstairs into the Hall of Fame, and there in the basement is John Cipollina's amplifier, a massively incredible thing, the Standell solid state with the Fender tubes and those two horns coming out the top. You know, I'm closer to that than I was when I saw him play live at the Fillmore in the turn of the 70s. You know, he's my great touchstone, and to see this amplifier and be able to look at it and study it and imagine the sounds. And of course, Jim, I know you're going to let me play through it one day. just letting you know. But I like these relics. They help illuminate. I don't think, you know, this argument that if you put something in a museum, it preserves it in amber and it makes it kind of dead and immobile. You know, that may be if that's the only place it is. But I think, as we see from South by Southwest and wandering that madhouse last night, there's at least 400,000 bands here, all making a great noise. So rock and roll is really in no danger of disappearing. But what is in danger of disappearing is the stuff of rock and roll, the sense of context that it has.